Welcome to the Power of Music podcast, brought to you by JM International. Get ready to explore conversations with those making a difference through music.
Hello, and welcome everyone to the Power of Music podcast, provided to you by JMI, Jeunesse Musicale International, a global network of NGOs that empowers young people through music across all boundaries. Today, we are recording from the Future Music Forum in Barcelona, Spain, in a series recorded during this amazing conference. My name is Ricardo, and I'll be your host. And for this episode, I'm joined by Mark Mulligan. Mark is the Managing Director of MiDiA Research and a long-term media and technology analyst and a leading thinker on the music industry's digital transition. Thank you so much for being here today for the podcast. Can you tell a bit about your journey and how you ended up in media research?
Sure. So my journey started in music, not in research, as pretty much most of the music businesses, right? It's
Exactly.
full of people who music moves them. And, a lot of people are very creative, but don't necessarily have what it takes to go and be a full-time artist. So they work out how to work in the rest of the music business. And that was my journey. I'm the third generation of classical guitarists in my family. My dad had a recording studio, used to play in lots of bands, was a world-leading renowned scientist, and gave up science to go and work on his own music business.
Wow.
And so music was always going to be what drove me. I was a dance music artist in the late 90s, had some singles out, got some support from my big DJs, used to play 1,000-cap venues. And I realized I wasn't good enough to pay the bills with it. So I worked for an internet research company back when you could have a thing called an internet research company.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there as a data analyst. And I said to my boss one day, this was 1999, so before Napster, the piracy thing had happened, which kicked off, digital music. And I said, look, I've got a record deal, a publishing deal. I've helped set up a record label. I feel like I understand the basics of how the music business works. And then I see everything I'm doing in my day job around, what's happening with the rise of the internet economy. I feel like the two are going to come together somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how, but so I said to my boss, how about if I come in an hour early and I leave an hour late, let me sort of try to read up and see what I can find. And, I had this thing, I'll give him a name check. It's a guy called Evan Neufeld, the best boss you could possibly imagine, had your back, would always fight your corner, let you be the best version of who you could be, gave you the support you needed, didn't ask what time you got in or what time you left. You're just really interested in, are you doing good work in the right way? And that's how I personally have always tried to build myself as a manager, and how I built the company. But so if it wasn't for Evan Neufeld, there wouldn't be any media research, there wouldn't be any of this. So I started doing this, and 6 months later, Napster launched. And in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Yes, exactly.
And I basically rode that wave ever since. Suddenly everybody needed to know. And in those days, this was, pre the days of Amazon and Apple and Google dominating. It was like the AOLs and the Yahoos and the MSNs, and then the record labels started to become clients. And in that time, there was very, very little belief in the internet as anything other than a threat by the record labels. I had some horrific sessions where I was torn to pieces. I was basically I was the prey in hunting parties when I was called in to do label presentations in those days. But we stuck with it. My colleagues at the time, there's a guy called Aaron Seinreich, who's now a lecturer, a tenured lecturer in the US at a good university. There's a guy called David Card. There's Mark Moradian, who's now at Amazon, and he's still and we were basically this team of music analysts at Jupiter at the time. And we made this call in the early 2000s. The future's going to be subscriptions.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lesson then, which I've taken to now, which is you can be right about a call, but you've got to be patient.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a long time for the world to catch up with good ideas. And then, to condense the rest of the story. But basically, throughout those years, I spent a long time at Jupiter. I spent probably about sort of close to 15 years. And in careers, there's a balance between being loyal and having lack of ambition.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just about the right time, we got bought by our biggest competitor, Forrester. I headed up their global media practice for a while, and then decided to go solo, and then set up MiDiA a couple of years later. And I think the unifying factor throughout that journey, to what MiDiA does today, and that is a couple of things. Number one is the analysis that I've done throughout all of that time has been understanding the value chain from start to finish. So whatever creative industry you're in, there's basically 4 key components. There's creation.
Mm-hmm.
So in music, that's singers and songwriters and producers, etc. Then you have rights, record labels, publishers, PROs, etc. Then you have distribution, and that can be Spotify, but it's also the infrastructure and all the bits that sit. And then you've got consumption, the consumer. And no system works if any one of those components isn't served properly. So we always take this cross-value chain view, and it sounds like quite a dry term, cross-value chain view, but it's really important because you have tech companies who often are perceived by rights holders to undervalue rights. And then you have rights holders who tech companies think overvalue rights.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we end up a bit like the UN peacekeeping forces of the digital entertainment world. And so so you take that viewpoint, but then I think when we explain to, it's like new starters who come and join the company or to, prospective clients, we always sort of explain what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. So I've just explained the what we do. The how is all sort of, we've got lots of quite nice ways that we do things about understanding, seeing the big picture of everything. But the why is the second really big component. And the why is having a passion for what you talk about and write about and having a sense of purpose. Why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
So the entertainment world is full of for-profit businesses, and MiDiA is a for-profit business. But fundamentally, is if you're only doing something for the profit purpose, then you are going to essentially, look back at the end of your career and think, what did I do? So we always try to see what is it that we can move here. So at the moment, our big thing is how can we ensure that creators, singers, songwriters, producers, long tail, big, small, it doesn't matter. How are they fairly placed in the ecosystem? And that's not just about how much money do they earn. It's like how much is a voice heard? Well, even if you think about, like, say, distribution platforms, you could look at a TuneCore or a DistroKid, and they are fantastic at giving an opportunity for self-releasing artists to go and reach an audience in the world. But they also have a really big similarity with Google, which is they're a platform business. They're in the business of taking lots of small bits of things to add up to something big. So one of our purposes at the moment is how to make a business more aligned around the objectives of the small pieces, so that you don't sell a false dream. Like, there might be someone who has only got 10 people who's going to listen to their obscure glitch jazz music, but the job of the industry should be to help them find that 10 people, not to let them say, you could be as big as Taylor Swift. So that's a long-winded way of saying that's how I got here. It's because I'm passionate about music, as well as passionate about the culture and the business of music. And MiDiA is full of passionate people we've got game streamers, we've got authors, songwriters, performers, the work. I just think that is a really important part of, anything that you do in life. If you believe in it, you're going to do it better.
Oh, I love that. I saw your presentation earlier, which I thought was very, very insightful. And I'm not going to ask you to summarize that, because then you should have been here at the Future Music Forum. And I heard you're here almost every year. So please, next year, you can see the whole talk. But if you would have to pick one thing that you think stands out or is the most relevant, what would that be?
So the big theme, which I tried to develop this year, and to be frank, we've been developing for a couple of years now, is that we're not at the start of something new. We're already probably starting the second lap of something new. So one of the things that I tried to pull out in the presentation is what we do as humans to understand things is we like to categorize. We like to create chapters. We like to sort of create frameworks to help us understand things. And one of those things is looking back and saying, this is when this period started. And I do. The analogy I used in the presentation was, you think about history, we've got like the classical ancient era, then we've got the dark ages, then we've got the middle ages, but it's not like somebody woke up in 1217 and went, oh, the dark ages are over. It's when you look back and you look at all the evidence and you see, oh yeah, by this stage, things had really started to change. It's like when somebody talks about a millennial or a Gen Z. Well, if somebody's 21, how do you say that they're definitely Gen Z, they're definitely millennial? They can't. They have characteristics which overlap. So we think about it in broad brushstrokes. And in the music business, we think we had the CD era, the piracy era, the download era, the streaming era. And it's now really is, what is this thing that we're in now? It will probably be the creation era, but there'll be a different name for it. But that's going to be the defining characteristic. And the really interesting thing about the streaming era, it came as this, as I said, we at Jupiter back in the early 2000s said subscriptions are going to be the future. Streaming wasn't the mechanism back then, but subscriptions we thought is going to be the future. It was a really left field idea. I'm not going to say we invented it because there was a company called Rhapsody trying to do it at the time, but we saw it and we went, yes, this is where we think things will go. And now it is entirely the mainstream of the recorded music business. If you're an artist, a songwriter, a label, publisher, whatever, that is the centerpiece of everything. You might have loads of problems with it, but it is the centerpiece of what the business is about. And so what we're saying is that what's going to come next is almost going to be an antidote to a lot of the problems which streaming has created. So the odds are streaming is going to be like the plumbing of the music business long term. Right? It does a really good job of getting music from A to B and doing it in a really convenient, very cost-effective manner. But there are lots of things that got lost in the transition. So if you think about music in its purest sense, or even, just the relatively recent history of music. So let's take it from the rock and roll era, the post-war era, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even a lot of the 90s. Music was a central cultural identifier for youth, right? It was the thing that said who you were. So in the 1950s, you could tell if somebody was a rock and roll kid, they'd have a leather jacket, they'd have the quiffs. In the 60s, you could tell who the mods and the rockers were and the teddy boys. And in the 70s, punk and rock. And in the 80s, glam metal. And, and all of them, indie kids in the 90s. Because music was this central thing. There weren't that many other things that were designed for youth. Right. And why is youth really important? Because youth are the formative years. The things that you do, the connections that you make in your formative years, they shape largely who you're going to be for the rest of your life. So the music that you like when you are in your teens and your 20s, you're probably going to like versions of that throughout the rest of, of your life. And now we're in an era, exactly when things started going wrong for the music business. And we got to this stage where suddenly there's piracy and people didn't have to pay and all of that sort of stuff. Computer gaming started to really come up. Extreme sports started to. You started having more TV channels and more things catering towards youth. And, so all of these things meant that people had more cultural identifiers. So you fast forward to today and if you compare a Gen Z now, compared to, say, a teenager in the 80s, let's say they're growing up in a small provincial town somewhere. In the 80s, they might, if they're lucky, they might have a record shop which might have what's in the charts and a tiny bit more. A bookshop that would have a relatively limited range. They would have a relatively limited number of magazines that they could read. There were only so many radio channels, or only so many TV channels. So you have a really quite small selection of things to say who you are. And then you go into today's era where a kid will be having a view on the climate crisis. They will have a particular type of trainers that they like, a number of TikTok influencers that they like. And then music will be one part of how they build their identity, but it's going to be the soundtrack to their identity, unless they're absolutely music obsessed, and that those people still exist. But it's more like music is part of like this smorgasbord of defining who you are. And why all this matters to we're being at this new phase is because that bit about identity, music saying who you are, that got left behind in the streaming transition, right? So where's your collection of CDs in your bedroom to show your new girlfriend? Where all those sort of things.
I have a whole wall of vinyls though, but
like,
maybe a bit
weird.
them,
but there are not many like 17-year-olds now who will have, and so it's like, and in the old days, like, oh yeah, I've got that album. So I've got that album means you like that artist so much, you spent money to get it. I've listened to that track. What does that mean? Anybody can listen to the track. So the fact that you've heard something is not a badge of fandom. The fact you used to buy something was a badge of fandom, which is why kids are buying vinyl and they're buying t-shirts, because it's one of those ways of saying who I am.
Yeah.
But you can't do that with streaming. Right? There is no equivalent in streaming, in Western streaming anyway. So the fandom bit is missing from streaming. We've got problems about remuneration. Like nobody feels like they're getting paid enough. And then you've got, although you could argue actually the big rights holders, they are getting paid enough. They just want to get paid more. And then you've got so many people releasing music, it's become a problem, right? There's not it's really difficult for people to be able to cut through. And the list can go on, but arguably the most important cultural aspect is that streaming started off as a place to listen to music, and it's become a place to consume audio.
Yeah.
Right. And in that context, it's fantastic. We've got more music in more people's ears, more hours of the day, but less of those hours are special. You know, it's like, it's the music that you put on to go on the treadmill. It's the music that you put on to study to. It's, you know, and all of those sorts of things. So that's why if you take all of those components, so fandom has been left behind, listening has become commodified as consumption, the remuneration model isn't working quite as well as it should. It's really difficult to cut through the clutter. It seems a bit imbalanced towards the really big established players. And because when something is big and established, what people do is they build moats around it. It's like, I don't want this to break because this is how I built my career. This is how I built my business, etc. And that's why all of these, when you hear about, you know, it's like a few years ago, all they talk about blockchain and smart contracts and none of this stuff actually got embraced by the music business because it put at risk a lot the core model. So that's why we think what's coming now, and I know I've done a lot of build up for this, but it's like, you know, what's coming now is basically you've got all of these, think of these as the problems in themselves are also seeds. And those seeds are germinating and they're all different. They're separated, but our very strong view is the unifying factor is the creator. We're not saying artist, we're not saying songwriter, because these days the new generation of creators have to write, produce, perform, create social content. You know, they're a creator in a very full sense. They've got a very clear idea of who they are, not just the music that they make. These creators are going to be looking to try to build something which enables them to have a fan base, not an audience, because streaming lets them have an audience. Great, I've got 1 million streams. What does that mean? I have no idea who listened.
Exactly.
I can't talk to them. Brilliant. I've got like 500,000 people listen to me in Mexico City. Well, I don't know. Are they heavy listeners? Are they light listeners? If I go and play there, they're going to like me enough to go and, you know, come and see the gig and whatever else.
We used to always say that people that listen to your music on Spotify, even that follow you on a social media platform, they're not fans of you. They're fan of Spotify and they just listen to your music, or they're fan of Instagram and they just happen to also look at your pictures.
So it's completely right. So big platforms have a relationship with creation, not with creators. Right. So what platforms want to do is ensure that the audience is delighted and their expectations are exceeded by what they're getting. So the algorithms deliver exactly what they want when they want it. And it matters less to a streaming service if that person has listened to 1,000 songs from one song 1,000 times from one artist, or 1,000 songs from one artist, from 1,000 artists. It doesn't matter as much. But if anything, it's maybe preferable if you listen to 1,000 different artists, because that means they depend even more upon the streaming service to deliver them 1,000 songs. Finding one artist to listen to 1,000 times, you can do that. Finding 1,000 artists to listen to once, you need algorithms to do that for you. So I think all of these things put together, we see that things are already happening. So the evidence point that we use in the presentation is there are nearly 6.5 million self-releasing artists. So they're the people without record labels who are using DistroKid, CD Baby, TuneCore, etc., to go and get themselves onto streaming platforms. This is an absolute revolution in the music business. It's the fastest growing part of the recorded music business. It's already about 6% of the global market, growing far faster than independent labels, major labels, etc. But that in itself is a microcosm of a much wider creator base and a musician base. So we're talking about tens of millions of people who are releasing music outside of streaming, right? And that might be putting stuff on TikTok or YouTube or SoundCloud or BandLab. It could just be releasing to their friends on their private Instagram group. It can be any of those sorts of things. And what is really interesting is not only are there more of them, it's growing more quickly, nearly twice the rate of the people releasing onto streaming.
Oh, wow.
So you take that, the evidence is already there.
Yeah.
And I put this in now, even though I closed my presentation with it. The bit about trying to understand, joining the dots of what is happening now, so that, you know, you and your audience and the people here at the conference could actually say, we can already see how this is connecting now. Everybody else will connect the dots in a couple of years. So the science fiction author, William Gibson, has this quote, which is, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. You know, and I think so and it's super exciting. The case I made, you know, in the closing parts of the presentation was, this is likely to be not streaming version 2, where it's something that the traditional music industry will first of all embrace and then co-opt and finally leverage as its own, as its own power base. We think this is something that's going to operate alongside streaming. It's going to be a new lane on the highway that's going to be opened up, because so much of this stuff just doesn't fit in the traditional music business. And it might be that even rights aren't a very big part of this, because unfortunately rights can get in the way. They can slow things down. They slow the rate of innovation. And if you end up having to go to the rights holders, well, the biggest rights holders are the ones who you have to get on board first. They're the most conservative. They're the ones who are going to take your really big idea and turn it into a really small idea that costs 10 times as much as you thought it was going to cost. And so that's why we think a creator-led element to the music business, we think is going to be this, that's going to be the groundswell. But the last section of the presentation, the thing that's going to essentially make this go nuclear is the consumerization. So essentially music's Instagram moment. Instagram turned photography from something that a few % of the population did to the entire population does it. And then TikTok has done a similar thing for video. Well, why wouldn't the same happen for music? Of course it'll happen for music. And I tried not to talk much about AI in the presentation, because AI will play a really big part of this. Yeah. But it's not because of AI. It's just that AI is the tool that will enable those jobs to be done. It's the thing that will empower the creators. It will empower the consumers. And so at the moment, we have around about 100,000 new songs uploaded onto streaming every day. And that is in many ways disastrous for being able to cut through the clutter. There's a finite amount of money that has to get divided up more ways. The music economist Will Page calls it, there's too many mouths to feed. There's only so much that, can go around. And so you think about that when consumers start making music, then we'll be talking about potentially millions every single day. And I'll just finish with this bit. It's like the example I gave in the presentation was, imagine a 13-year-old kid waking up in the morning and thinking, I really can't be bothered to do an Instagram video, photo this morning. Just use my little music making tool. Right. I'm feeling sleepy, but upbeat, excited, but a little pensive, and a little bit jazzy. Click, swipe, swipe, swipe.
There it is.
15 seconds of music, post it to all of her friends, and, her 250 people who she's got following on Instagram, 50 or so of them, like it. A few of them share it. Somebody goes and remixes their own version back at her. And suddenly that's been done by millions or tens or hundreds of millions of people every day. That changes the entire concept of what music is as a business and crucially as entertainment. Right? So creation becomes entertainment instead of merely consumption becomes entertainment.
Yeah, wow. I recently said on the podcast, I know where that came from. I said, maybe a picture is worth more than 1,000 words, but maybe a song is worth more than 1,000 pictures. Yeah. So I get if you can actually do that 15 seconds of like, I'm feeling a bit, whatever, it's a Blue Monday, here it is. And you can hear like, that's a Blue Monday. That's powerful. Yeah. If people want to look at the research or even want to connect with you or like want to know what you're doing, where can they find you? Where can they find the research?
The bad news is that MiDiA Research is a subscription platform, which is quite expensive. Good news is we create a huge amount of stuff that we make available for free. Yeah. So what I recommend you do is, so it's MiDiA Research, which is spelled MiDiA. We're not dyslexic. We do know it's not how you spell media. And that's because it's short for Media, Insights and Decisions in Action. So it's MiDiaResearch.com. If you go there, you can sign up to our newsletter. Our newsletter is not like many newsletters. We're not trying to sell you anything in the newsletter. So the newsletter will give you every week write-ups of all of what we're thinking about in that week, highlights of the blogs, telling you about some data points, a little bit of narrative about what we think is, big to watch this day, other stories that we're interested in. So we found it's been really valuable. It's a big, fast-growing newsletter, and it's not one to sell you stuff. So sign up to that and look at the blog.
I read it, and it's wonderful, and it's not silly at all. I always thought that MiDiA was a play on MIDI. No. MIDI music, media.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I'll give you a little sort of unknown, not well-known fact about MiDiA. We've got a circle that goes from the I to the end of the word. And that was because 10 years ago when we started the business and we were trying to drag old media into the digital arena, we took the I from media and took it to the end to be the dot in the .com.
Clever. As always, the very, very last question. Yeah. What is the power of music?
The power of music is to say who you are, and when you've got who you are, that can be helping you through tough times, letting you ride through amazing times. It can be the power to change. It can be the power to have a message, all of those things which we know music can do. So it says who you are, which is one of the reasons why it's almost quite sad that we've got this commodification of music where many more people are spending the time with it just something in the background like sonic wallpaper.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the world has always been that way, right? Radio's always been there. There's always been a passive audience. But the difference is streaming has got the world's most avid music fans in there as well. So it means more of the listening time of the world's most engaged music fans is getting turned into passive consumption. And that's why, when I was talking about fandom and how fandom needs to be a part of whatever comes next, fandom is a symptom. The cause is identity. And so that's the thing. It's like music, the reason people make music, the reason people dance to music, the reason people like music, the reason they share songs and tell people what they like and all those sorts of things is because it's about who we are.
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening. If you want more information about JM or you would like to get involved, visit www.jmi.net. At JMI, we are on a mission to make the world more musical. That's why we created MuBazaar, a digital platform that helps us manage all our musical activities across 80 countries worldwide, connecting musicians with opportunities to grow both personally and professionally. If you are a music professional looking for a better way to manage and promote your music activities, check out MuBazaar. Created for music organizers, by music organizers, MuBazaar allows you to run music competitions, workshops, camps, auditions, masterclasses, awards, events, and much more. MuBazaar offers custom application forms, payments for your activities, jury tools, translations, analytics, and more. MuBazaar is fast becoming the best place for musicians to find and apply for music opportunities online, and you can sign up today for a free organizer account by going to www.mubazaar.com, registering, and then requesting to upgrade to an organizer on the right-hand menu. For more info, don't hesitate to get in touch via support@mubazaar.com. It would mean a lot to us if you could give us 1 minute of your time and rate and review the podcast. In case you have any suggestions or would like to be one of our next guests, feel free to reach out to us through the JMI socials.